So when people often talk about spiritual awakening, it's often described as like a single moment, like a switch flips and suddenly everything becomes clear. Kind of like as if you make your morning coffee and suddenly understand the entire universe before breakfast. But for most people, awakening doesn't happen all at once. And what it will do is often unfold in phases and through different centers of our being. And I want to share the three forms of awakening that at least happened for me, but I'm aware have happened for others. And that's awakening in the mind, awakening in the heart, and awakening in the gut. And that's the order that I happen to experience them into. But there really is no correct order. Some people awaken through the heart first, others through the body or the gut or the mind. Some experience them simultaneously and revisit them again and again throughout their life. So awakening is not always a linear thing. It's usually pretty organic and individual to everyone on that path, or even not on that path. But I want to talk about awakening of the mind first, and that's kind of like becoming nothing. And that's the first awakening I experienced was in the mind. And this is the awakening when you realize that you're not your thoughts, you're not your beliefs, your emotions, your body, your stories, or identities. And it can be slightly shocking at first, because most of us have spent our entire life, or decades at least, where we think we are the voice in our head, narrating everything like a slightly or sometimes very dramatic sports commentator. So when this happens, this shift occurs from being inside the mind to observing the mind. So our thoughts continue, but they no longer define us. And this is often described as becoming a nothing. And not a nothing in a nihilistic sense, but nothing in the sense of no longer being fixed to a sense of self, or a sense of fixed self. So in this awakening, the mental construct of me loosens on us. So our awareness remains, but identifying as this me relaxes. And there's often relief here, and the relief can be less reactivity, less attachment, less suffering tied to our thoughts. But this awakening of the mind on its own is not a full awakening. So if awakening only stays in the mind, then life can start to feel distant and disconnected, and that's what I experienced. And overall, what happens is we witness the emotions and thoughts, but we don't really feel them fully. So we observe life without truly participating in it. And that detachment can masquerade as freedom. It can become very peaceful, but also becomes the equivalent of like a spiritual couch potato, watching life instead of participating in life. So the mind awakening brings clarity, but not really intimacy with life. And so something more is needed to get that intimacy. And that's usually the awakening of the heart. And that's usually becoming one with everything. For me, awakening really moved to the heart after the mind, but after a fair while. And that's where there's no separation and all separation dissolves. And you feel it as a reality. This is when you feel a sense of being one with everything. So you don't just understand connection, you feel it. And love we have becomes less conditional and compassion arises more naturally. The sense of other softens as well. And you start to feel compassion for everyone, even the person who took your parking spot or whoever it may be. Now, the heart awakening brings warmth where the mind brought space. So the heart awakening brings meaning, it allows tenderness, grief, joy, and devotion, and they can all coexist. But even the heart awakening has a shadow if it's not integrated. So without grounding, love can turn into self-sacrifice. Boundaries can blur, pain, your own or others, can become overwhelming, and suddenly you're feeling everyone's emotions in the room. And you want to save the world in that as well. So unity without the embodiment can drain our system. And so awakening continues if we want to have a more full awakening, a more integrated awakening. And the next one is the awakening of the gut. And that's becoming part of a giant void. And that's the third thing I experienced as well, was in the gut, or the core of my being. And this one's a bit harder to describe because it's more conceptual. It's not conceptual or emotional, it's more like existential. So here the sense of control dissolves and the sense of matter dissolves and we fall into a black hole. So certainty collapses, the ground disappears, things that feel tangible disappear. But what remains isn't scary, but what remains is a vast silent presence. And it's often experienced as becoming part of a giant void, which may sound dramatic, but it's really less like falling into a horror movie and more like realizing that the universe is much bigger than we ever thought. Not an emptiness as an absence, but emptiness as infinite potential. And with this awakening, what that brought is more of a trust in life, trust in uncertainty, trust without needing reassurance. So it roots awareness into the body and into existence itself. But without this integration of this awakening, that can feel destabilizing. So people may experience things like fear or meaninglessness, loss of orientation, or existential confusion. But when supported by the clarity of the mind and the openness of the heart, the void becomes grounded and not annihilation. So these awakenings are not meant to compete. No, they're really meant to support one another. So the mind awakening brings clarity and freedom from illusion. The heart awakening brings love, compassion, and connection. And the gut awakening brings trust and embodiment. But the mind without heart becomes cold. The heart without gut becomes fragile. And the gut without mind becomes quite disorienting as well. So integration is what allows the awakening to become a livable experience. But even with these three awakenings, awakening itself has no finish line. No, there's no I've awakened, now I'm there. It's an ongoing process. You may revisit these things many, many times as well. And each one can deepen, soften, or mature, and you get more and more awareness of what's there. And again, it's worth repeating that just because this is the order that happened for me, yours may be completely different. And nothing's gone wrong if your path doesn't look like what I'm saying today. So wherever you are in your spiritual journey, just trust the process. Whether you're discovering spacious awareness, opening into love, or standing at the vast unknown. Or maybe you haven't experienced any of them yet, and that's okay. Stop chasing them. You're not lost, but you're in the process of remembering. Through nothingness, through oneness, through the great silent void that's there. And occasionally realizing that sometimes inner peace comes with a side of utter confusion and learning how to live in utter confusion as well. So overall, that's the important part there. But the more you chase, the further they get. So it's really about being aware of what is. And these things happen spontaneously. There's no doing to get them. They will happen more likely on their own. You can only do little parts to encourage it.